Following the previous episode, the protagonist went to the beach to fish, only to find a large ship stranded. It seemed the people on board had been dead for some time, but the protagonist noticed one person was still alive. Seeing this, the protagonist decisively took the man home. The man, after regaining consciousness, thanked the protagonist and gave his name. He then told the protagonist what had happened. It turned out they had been attacked by a giant octopus during their voyage, and he was the only survivor. Just as the protagonist was comforting him, Abel smiled faintly and said not to worry, it's just some smuggled food, isn't it? As he spoke, Abel's stomach growled. Seeing this, the protagonist had no choice but to cook him some food. Abel seemed a little embarrassed since the protagonist looked like a poor man, yet he had been given such a lavish meal. The protagonist could only explain that he lived alone there, and when his clothes were torn, he had nowhere to get them. The food was all earned through his own labor. He even showed off a bit. Water magic. After dinner, Abel had the protagonist take him back to the stranded beach. However, the bodies of the smugglers were all gone. Abel suspected they had been eaten by something and didn't think much of it. He then searched the shipwreck, but it seemed he found nothing. He then asked the protagonist about his future plans, but the protagonist said he didn't know. Seeing this, Abel invited him to travel with him to a town called Rune. The protagonist readily agreed. After all, he had been a savage for many years, and it was time to go out and see the world. That night, they returned to the cabin for a short rest. The protagonist remarked that staying here for so long was really getting tiring. Late at night, the protagonist went alone into the forest to meet the headless horseman. He told the horseman he would be leaving for a while and thanked him. Then they engaged in a final battle. The protagonist fought fiercely and ultimately fought to a draw. Before parting, the headless horseman gave the protagonist a robe. The next day, the protagonist donned the new robe and set off on a journey with Abel. While traversing the forest, they encountered a small wild boar. Abel used her fighting skills to easily defeat the boar. The protagonist was astonished, as he had never heard of anything other than magic. Afterwards, they encountered a group of lizard men. Not wanting to fight in the swamp, the protagonist and his companions chose a detour, but were still discovered by the lizard men. Forced to fight, they declared they would fight this time and used ice lance, easily defeating several lizard men. Abel was stunned. He had heard from his magic sealing friend that a single cast of heroic chant could only release one weapon, yet the protagonist had released 4. Unable to explain, he made up an excuse and continued onward. Along the way, Abel gave the protagonist a coin. The protagonist remarked that this was the first time he had ever seen money. Abel explained, this is the currency circulating in the kingdom where Rune resides. Although the currency is issued by different countries, the units of currency are interchangeable. Soon after, the two finally emerged from the forest and arrived at a plain. But they hadn't gone far when Abel noticed something was wrong with the surrounding rocks. He slashed with his sword, and the male protagonist used an ice wall to block the attack. The two were suddenly surrounded by rocks. It turned out they had stumbled upon the lair of the Balrog. Abel used a fighting technique, but it was useless. At this moment, the male protagonist said he had a skill he wanted to use. This instantly sent the Balrog to the second dimension. After the battle, they discovered a fiery golem lay motionless on the ground. It turned out the golem's energy came from the magic stone beneath its feet. The magic stone absorbed the earth's energy, so it wouldn't move when it fell. The two had never seen such a large magic stone before, so they kept it as their loot. Afterwards, they watched the battle between the hippopotamus and the dragons. However, the hippopotamus used a sonic attack, quickly defeating a group of dragons. That night, the two sat by the campfire. Abel mentioned that the hippopotamus's attack during the day was most likely a magic nullification technique, and there were many such traps in the dungeon. Hearing about the dungeon, the protagonist expressed his desire to explore it. Just then, the two headed to Rune, where there was an underground city and skilled dwarves who were adept at blacksmithing. The next morning, Abel couldn't help but wonder how the protagonist, this savage, knew the direction to Rune. The protagonist recalled his previous conversation with the dragon, where the dragon had told him where the human city was. After recalling this, the protagonist said that some things were better left unsaid. Abel didn't say anything more. After some time, the two arrived in the northern mountains. There, they encountered a griffin. Fortunately, the griffin was just hungry and left after getting its food, much to the relief of the two. Afterwards, the two said, this land is quite unusual. It seems this mountain range is blocking monsters like hippos and dragons from reaching inhabited areas. Speaking of dragons, the protagonist recalls the dragon he fought with the hippopotamus. It seemed to have flown from the north. Sure enough, the two soon spotted 2 dragons. Abel remarked that monsters of this caliber would require at least 20 adventurers to slay. The protagonist, however, disregarded this and used several ice spears to pin the 2 dragons to the ground. Abel also successfully caught a sword. After collecting the magic stones, the two continued their journey and finally saw the northern continent, the place they were heading to.